So now coming to tonight's session, it's a very exciting workshop that we've planned on branding. What is branding, when to do it, how to use it, and why is it so important? And we have three really experienced industry professionals from a Toronto-based branding studio with Creative to share their valuable knowledge and expertise with you. I'd like to introduce our esteemed speakers for today, Andrew Patterson. Andrew has nearly 20 years of experience in design and branding. He is a proud partner of Wisp Creative and also teaches graphic design and illustration at Sheridan College. Joining Andrew is Monica Lowe. Monica's breadth of experience stretches from publishing to design to branding to business consulting, all over a successful 20-plus year career. She is a partner and key brand strategist at West Creative. And our third speaker for tonight, Lucas Di Clavasio. Lucas started his first business when he was 23 years old and learned about the branding process by diving in headfirst. He has a decade of experience in design and branding industry and has recently started exploring the world of user research. Andrew, Monica, and Lucas, I welcome you to begin the session.
Great, thank you so much, Alina. Hey, Y-Space. Thanks for tuning into our crash course on branding today. I believe Lucas is gonna pull up the slides. Perfect. And so today we're gonna go over the importance of building a great brand and all the various components that form a cohesive identity. So as Alina said, I'm Monica Lowe and I'm part of the Wisp Creative team. We are a boutique branding studio in Toronto and we specialize in branding systems for modern businesses. We've been doing this for close to a decade now, so we've definitely dialed in our systems and I'm excited to share them with you. Joining me here is again Andrew Patterson and Lucas Di Clavasio. While Andrew and Lucas will focus on what makes a brand look and sound great, I'll be focusing on the under the hood strategic kind of stuff that builds a strong and meaningful foundation. So enough about us, let's dig into the crash course. And as Lena said, we can save all of our questions for the end. We'll do a Q&A right after. So what is branding? A brand is your business's backbone and identity, and it's much more than a logo. It's commonly thought that the logo makes the brand, or perhaps the chosen fonts and colors. And while those are important elements, they can't even be considered until you get to the root of what you're offering and understand who you are offering it to. So if a brand isn't just a logo or fonts or colors, then what is it? A brand is how people find and recognize you. A brand is how you align with people's beliefs and ideals. And a brand is how you make people feel. So I'm sure you've been there where a glimpse of the Starbucks screen has you maybe craving a coffee, or your love of the outdoors has you browsing the Patagonia website for a pullover. Or perhaps you're feeling pretty strong, athletic, and fast in your Nikes. A great brand can make you feel so good that you'll feel like an athlete just wearing those Nikes even to the mall. So what else does a brand do? A brand also targets, promises, and inspires. A brand will target the right customers and weed out the wrong ones. A brand will promise what you can successfully do for your customers. And a brand will inspire those that value it, both customers and employees. A brand not only attracts customers and helps a business make money, but it also helps businesses hire talent via shared beliefs and ideals. So that's a lot of heavy lifting, and it's why a killer brand is an absolute necessity for a new business to get right. So now that you know what a brand is, you got to think about who you want to see it, which is obviously your customer. You have to know and understand your customer before you can build a brand that connects with them in a meaningful way. Who are they? What do they like? How do they like to be spoken to? What do they like to look at? The answers to these questions will dictate how your brand is built and designed. How do you get to know your ideal customer better? You develop a persona. So what is a persona? It's a detailed description of a member of your ideal audience and target market. Once you know your ideal customer, client, or audience, you'll be able to attract them to your business and convert them into paying and repeating customers. Additional terms you may hear are buyer persona, customer persona, audience persona, marketing persona, or even customer avatar or customer profile. While these all serve the same purpose, the way you gather the information needed may look a little different. Personas rely on some guesswork, but also inject real data you collect from social media interaction, focus groups, surveys, or real metrics from transactions. An avatar or profile is more presumptive, and it's generated from what you imagine your future customer to be, as you may not have the audience or interactions base to pull from just yet. And another thing to note that's quite important is when starting a business or building a brand, we can often put ourselves in the shoes of our ideal customers and we start writing copy we like, or we start designing graphics we enjoy. So you're not creating or designing for you, you're doing this for them. Having a solid persona keeps you on track, addressing what they need as opposed to what you want. So how do you create this persona? We like to break it down into 3 steps. So number 1, you're going to do your research. Number 2, you're going to nail down your demographics and psychographics. And number 3, you're going to flesh it all out and bring it to life. So we'll start with the research component. To create a persona, you'll have to do some research, and where you pull your data from might look quite different depending on where you are on your entrepreneurial journey. If you're just starting out, there will be quite a bit of guesswork, but you shouldn't be completely stumped. You should have a business plan or even a simple lean canvas to pull from, outlining what you're doing and who it's for. So if you're following proper startup protocol, you'll have researched and validated your product and even created a minimum viable product. Listen to those that react favorably to your offer, who they are and what feedback you're getting from them. Maybe you've started teasing your offer on socials to build a pre-launch audience. What analytics and metrics can you dig into? Can you dig through Facebook audience insights, your follower demographics, or can you pay attention to who's interacting with you? If you've already launched, do you have a customer database and an online storefront? Or do you have Google Analytics linked to your URL? An additional layer to your persona strategies is to scope out what your competitors are doing and who are they targeting and how. Look for trends and patterns, and don't be surprised if you're surprised. A product you thought was for women only might be resonating with men. Pants you designed for yoga might trend as a streetwear piece, or you may find the cream you formulated for sunburns has helped heal eczema. This gives you new customers to explore that might require their own segments and unique approach to both marketing and messaging. So once you've completed your research, you should be able to bucket that information into demographics and psychographics. Demographics is defining your ideal customer by tangible factors such as age, gender, marital status, income, location. Psychographics, on the other hand, have you focusing on characteristics that are slightly more intangible, such as interests, habits, attitude, emotions, and preferences. Combining both demographics and psychographics paints a powerful picture of your ideal customer, which allows you to build a brand they'll best respond to and be inclined to interact with. It's how you find out what they like the look of. It's how you align yourself with their beliefs and ideals, and how you determine what they want to feel. It's how you will target, promise, and inspire, as we mentioned earlier. Once the demographics and psychographics are filled out, you can continue bringing your persona to life by filling out additional prompts like background. So this is their job title, life stage, career, and family dynamic. Behavioral traits, these are their value systems, work ethic, their levels of positivity, kindness, generosity, etc. Interests, what books do they read, what shows and movies do they watch, all the way down to the music they listen to, and even if they're vegan or not. Social, which platforms are they on, which do they stay off of, and who do they follow? Buying behavior. What does their buying journey look like? What role does social media play in it? Are they researching online? Are they reading reviews? Or are they going in person to brick and mortar locations? Spending power. How much money does your audience have to spend? How do they approach purchasing decisions in your product and price category? Goals. What types of goals have they set or accomplished for themselves? Pain points and problems. What keeps them up at night? Is it personal or professional? What barriers are holding them back? Is your offer solving any problems for them? Solutions. How does your offering solve these pain points? How does your offer transform them, the customer, or their situation? Purchasing barriers. What would prevent them from purchasing? What objections would they have? Objection killers. How can you speak to these objections, preferably before they even come up? Messaging. How will you position your offering to this persona, and where will you present it? Preferred content type. What are the kinds of content your audience is most likely to engage with? Is it video, stories, product demos? Think about the content mix both online and offline. And then tone and voice. How do they like to be spoken to? What language do they use? There are also some special considerations for a B2B offering. You'll need to think about the size of the business. What kind of business will buy from you? Are they a startup or enterprise level brand? And who's the decision maker? Who makes the buying decisions? Are you targeting the CEO, CTO, or a member of the procurement team? Once you've answered these questions and created a persona, keep that document living. You may realize some assumptions are incorrect or need tweaking, and as your offer gains traction, the audience or customer may even morph a bit. What you learn about your customer will be constantly evolving. So how do you leverage your persona into highly effective marketing strategies and tactics? Once you have your persona fleshed out, you'll be able to use them as a compass. Every move you make will be influenced by the character you've created. They will determine where you show up, how you speak, how you sound, how you look, the colors you use, and the photography you source or take. You will use them as a lens and a sounding board. Remember, everything you're designing and building is for them, not for you. When reviewing potential creative, do it through their eyes and approve or tweak accordingly. Knowing your customer is an incredibly important part of building your brand, but so is an intimate knowledge of your business. Some entrepreneurs are so excited to start that they don't take a moment to think about what they're actually starting and why. So this next section will help you out with that. And it's the brand compass. A brand compass helps create a brand that fully reflects your offering and resonates with your customers. The graphic on the next page contains 5 core pillars: purpose, vision, mission, values, and position. If you've completed a thorough business plan, these questions and statements should flow naturally. Write them down and see if you can answer them. So the purpose, it's why do you exist? Why? Why are you doing, building, and making this? Why are you starting this business? Vision, that's what you'll achieve. What are the goals for your business? Think beyond financials and focus on the impact you can make. Products and services often change people's lives. How can your business do that? Mission, it's how you'll achieve it. What steps are you going to take to achieve your vision, and what are the milestones along the way? Values, what do you stand for? What are the beliefs, philosophies, and principles that will drive your business? Use these to connect with future customers in a meaningful way beyond sales. It's what keeps them coming back and advocating for you. Position, it's how you're different. What makes you stand out from the competition and look more attractive to your customers? Maybe you're offering more or wasting less. Think beyond price too. There's got to be something that makes your offer a no-brainer. Answers to the above questions, paired with a detailed customer persona, are what help mold a brand and its aesthetic. It's not just pretty marks on a page we're aiming for. We want recognition, trust, and alignment. So I'll pass it on to Andrew, and he'll explain how we use visuals to achieve this. So on to you, Andrew.
Excuse me. Thanks, Monica. I'm going to talk a little bit about the visual side of branding.
Ready? 1 second, I put something.
Oh, somebody mic'd up? Anyway, one of the things is with the rapid increase in sort of do-it-yourself platforms and out-of-the-box solutions for design, I feel like it's important to talk a little bit about the various pieces and approaches to the visual identity side of branding and the thought that goes into the various components. So we're going to start with logos and the various sort of types of logos because that's pretty core to visual identity. So yeah, so there's many different types of logos. There's brand marks. Apple's an example, one of those. We'll circle back to those because they're a little bit different. But You've got abstract logo marks. There's mascot logos, letter marks, which are also sometimes known as monograms. There's letter forms. McDonald's is an example of a letter form. There's word marks. There's emblems, and there's also logos that exist as a combination of all of the above. And while we're about to explore these types a little bit, the logo shouldn't necessarily be your biggest concern. It's more what's behind it that counts, but it's good to have just sort of a general knowledge of the different categories. So as you can see on this slide here, some of these are pretty self-explanatory, but abstract logo marks, their defining characteristic is they're not necessarily tied to any easily identifiable or representative icon for the product or service. They generally use color and shape predominantly to sort of evoke a feeling. Although they may have evolved from a representative icon. An example would be the Pepsi logo, which to look at it now is very much an abstract logo mark. But if you were to look at the evolution of the Pepsi logo, it actually harkens back to what the cap used to look like. You used to have text in front of that, but over the years, which is a trend actually, that's a conversation for another time, it has been sort of minimalized to its current iteration. Mascots, again, pretty self-explanatory. They're built around a figure or character. A lot of sports teams as sort of the most obvious example of mascot logos. But you can see the Michelin Man, Pillsbury Doughboy. Like there are other examples. Letter marks are typically a stylized representation of the company's abbreviated name. These are the ones that are also known as monograms for that reason. The examples here, you've got CNN, the Los Angeles Dodgers logo. It's usually just sort of a condensed version of a word mark, which, like letter marks, are stylized representations, but they're typically the full brand name. And then one of the other ones that I mentioned were letter forms. There's a lot of different terms I'm throwing at you here, but typically letter forms are icons that are built from a singular stylized letter. So the most obvious example might be McDonald's. The golden arches, like the McDonald's M. It's a singular letter form that's stylized, and that's sort of what distinguishes it from a letter mark. But depending on the designers you're working with, or depending on sort of where you're coming from, sometimes these different people use different terms for different logos. And finally, emblems, which are typically a combination of the above. They usually contain a mascot or an icon and also lettering, and it's usually within an encased shape. It's often a circle or a crest. The examples here: Starbucks, Brooklyn Brewery, and General Electric, of course. So these categories are not always mutually exclusive. An emblem may contain a mascot, an abstract logo may riff on a monogram. There is a lot of cross-pollination, but these are sort of the general buckets. Now, brand mark may be any of the above. Generally, a brand mark is a more conceptual, non-verbalized image that people associate with your brand. It also generally takes a little bit of time to build towards. It may be part of a logo, but may be different from the primary logo altogether. But in most cases, a brand mark evolves out of the sort of strongest, deepest connection with a given company. So some examples might be the Jordan Jumpman, the Nike swoosh, the Apple icon, or even Drake's company, OVO, the owl. Those are all prime examples of what a brand mark might be. It's like a feeling given form rather than simply a point of reference for your business. So next we'll just do a brief case study here. So the case study that I've chosen for logos is the Supreme Box logo. The Supreme Box logo it's basically a universal symbol that represents cool. At this point, the company itself started in 1994 in Manhattan as a small skate shop. And skating in the 90s was still largely underground and counterculture. The decade saw street skateboarding sort of dominate and eventually exploded into what most people think of as skating today. But as a result, at the time, there was sort of an edgy outsider slant to the subculture, even more than there might be today. A lack of sort of infrastructure for people to skate, and certainly in the scale we see today, led skaters to sort of invade repurpose and reimagine public spaces, often to extremely active opposition. But the story goes that the company founder, James Jebbia, on the way to releasing store branded tees alongside other skate brands. So they carried other brands at the time, but he wanted to release something that, represented their specific shop. He lent his graphic designer a book by the activist artist Barbara Kruger. And Kruger used boxed Futura, so Futura being the font, to create a series of collages in the late 80s that were, they were sort of a commentary on social issues, and predominantly, and now kind of ironically, consumerism. So you can actually see in the bottom left there, the image on this slide that says "I shop, therefore I am." That's one of the original artworks from the series that she was producing in the 80s. So, we weren't there. So while we can't know the specific process of arriving at this logo, it seems apparent, and there's a number of interviews out there that are pretty interesting, but the intent here was to embrace this sort of counterculture approach that reflected the values of skaters at the time. And Supreme would go on to not only become renowned for their collaborations and often hilarious branding and repurposing of a near limitless variety of objects, which you can see in the upper right there. They've done collaborations with Oreos, they've branded toothpaste, they even at one point sold a brick that was just the box logo on a brick, and it of course sold out, like pretty much all of their products do. But they also poked fun at other brands by repurposing their logos and imagery. So, the logo itself it's bold and loud, but it's also plain and unadorned, which is sort of counter to most of the brand skate culture often found itself diametrically opposed to, like luxury brands, things of that nature. It's very clearly in sort of history, its process, its execution, it was in keeping with the tenets of skate culture. And it spoke to, at the time, a very niche group of individuals. An interesting quote by the sort of cult film director Harmony Korine was that James tapped into a secret sauce, and they kept strong because youth propels the culture, and they're always on the side of the youth. You can't fake that. It is viral, like a meme of misbehavior that infects status, semiotics, and social decorum with data aesthetics, postmodern irony, cheeky disobedience, and savvy subterfuge everywhere it goes, which really is just a fancy way of saying that they really get it. Like they get who their target audience is, and they channel that knowledge, I guess, of what you might call their profiles into the brand itself and the design of the logo. So anyway, skate culture grew very explosively, and so did Supreme. It's largely held up today as one of the most authentic sort of OG skate brands still kicking, despite essentially at this point being a luxury brand, and all behind the strength of that box logo. And as with most outsider groups, eventually people wanted in. Supreme was purchased for $2.1 billion in 2019, which is, I'm sure, crazy to anybody that was in the 90s skating wearing one of those t-shirts. And the logo, unchanged since 1994, still stands for those in the know on the outside of mainstream culture. So let's move on to type. Consistency is key when you're building a brand, of course. Picking a typeface and sticking to it not only keeps you consistent, but it also gives you one less thing to think about. So setting type standards means you'll never have to deliberate about a typeface again. Fonts also have personality and vibes to them, so picking one that jives with your brand is like a little sneak peek into your company and what you do. For example, script and hand-drawn typefaces can feel more personal, more inviting, more warm, or decorative. A sans serif font, so sans serif fonts being fonts that with decorative feet and tails. Example on this slide would be the lower right. That would be an example of a sans serif font. They generally feel more contemporary or corporate even. A serif type family, so serif being the opposite of a sans serif font. The K on the bottom left is sort of an example. It's got this sort of decorative flourishes on it. That might be associated with sophistication or even ideas of heritage or tradition. And this is just scratching the surface. There's just countless fonts. while they do fall into a couple specific buckets, which I'm not going to go into too much today, they all sort of evoke different feelings. So a key factor in type selection has to do with design principles. These are qualities that designers understand, but viewers will perceive subconsciously generally. Things like, how does our eye interpret shape? How does a lightweight font feel? How does a heavy one feel? Is it round and soft, or is it sharp and rigid? Is it distressed, or is it clean? Is there a lot of breathing room between the letters? If we're talking about full words, or is it tight? Is it tight and bunched together? So it's something that I think a lot of times, moving through the world, we sort of take for granted. But based on the product or service you're offering, you can see how this might make a pretty significant difference in how people see your position. So for this case study for type, I want to talk a little bit about Nike, and I want to talk about Nike in a broader sense rather than focusing on the primary logo for the brand. We're going to talk a little bit about the systems that they've built out to allow each campaign to thrive and hit its target demographic. So, in my opinion, Nike and the agencies they work with are probably one of the leading users of a wide variety of typographic design to sell. In most cases, as long as the swoosh, the slogan "Just Do It" or the word mark is present, all bets are off. Like their campaigns just run the gamut. But they all feel Nike. So unlike Supreme's more organic approach to identifying and leveraging customer persona, which I think just sort of evolved out of them being, very close, very grassroots. They're very close to their sort of base. Nike, obviously, at this point, they're using pinpoint precision. Data analytics. They've got experts. They've got strategists. They're working with these agencies to achieve similar goals. So you'll notice in the examples assembled here, which are just a fraction, but mostly I've selected these ones because they're all relatively recent. There's a wide variety of approaches in the typography, really just the look and feel. The key here is that each one is sort of artfully and thoughtfully tied to the larger campaign, and it uses visual language to create a feeling or powerful association with each message. So take the Play New campaign. The Play New campaign was all about making people feel good about trying new things and not being a professional, basically. The advertisements, which really set the tone by being paired with this sort of hilarious, sloppy song called Sports by this punk band called the Viagra Boys. It showed people sort of slamming, wiping out, missing shots by a mile, getting knocked on their ass. And they even had a few professional athletes that they sponsored try their hand at random sports that weren't sort of their area of focus and just were terrible at it. And so the goal, presumably, because in this instance I wasn't in the room when they were developing the campaign, but the goal was to appeal in a non-threatening way to sort of a niche that the typically aggressive, sort of hyper-competitive messaging that Nike typically has wasn't reaching. So as such, the type was very playful. It was bright, colorful. There was a couple of different print ads. There was television ads. Ads that would come up in streaming. It still contains sort of Nike tilt and slant, and it feels very bold, but it's a bit gentler around the edges, softer than the typical sort of heavy all caps Futura. Once again, the font that modified version of the font that Nike uses for their main logo. We see in the "You Can't Stop Sport" campaign, which is at the upper right. There's an image there. This is from the print and digital components for one of what I think is one of the most brilliant campaigns in recent history. It spoke to sort of the shutdown of the pandemic, social unrest that was happening at the time in the world, and inequality that was sort of bubbling over, and kind of focused on sports' ability to unite. So it used the Nike font to sort of very bold effect and a bright red tag to sort of complete the campaign slogan, which was "You can't stop sport, you can't stop us." It captures your attention. It's sort of like bold activist postering, something that you might see like wheat pasted up on the streets. And it sort of served as a call to arms that was paired with sort of, again, very powerful, often very moving imagery, where they would, this example here with LeBron is sort of like shaking hands, like helping up this kid. But that the actual ad itself had all manner of insane, like they just expertly matched up different footage of things happening in the world with sports highlights. Like it was just really well done. But anyway, it's just very bold, powerful imagery. It sort of speaks to people who are fed up, people who are disenfranchised, or even people who are sort of languishing as a result of maybe being kept from physical activity or participating in sport, or because of various lockdowns. So some of the other assembled images here, they know how to speak gently with their typography on sensitive topics. So the example being this image that says, "Believe in something, you need sacrificing everything." It was very sensitive subject matter. It ended up being a very controversial campaign. So they toned it down. It feels very, it's not playful. It's not loud and abrasive. Like it's a very sort of subtle, soft spoken message. They know when to be goofy and playful to speak to sort of their traditionally more artistic and wacky fans. So the example I've got here is in the bottom right, there's an Air Max logo. It's from a poster for a promotion for the Air Max silhouette of shoe. The Air Max shoe, this is a generalization, but typically it's been a bit kookier, and a lot of sort of creative types, musicians, sort of even designers, that's like a favorite silhouette of theirs traditionally. So you'll see every year they have Air Max Day. The posters that they put out, the promotional campaigns they run, dramatically different. Like every year it's always something crazy. Like they really push what the type looks and feels like to really connect with that specific group of people. And they're also not afraid to get a little bit weird when they want to market a new product to a blossoming demographic that's maybe interested in change. So that example being here, the Nike Space Hippie. Nike had started using sort of recycled material from past shoes, and 100% recycled packaging, and the whole idea was that they were trying to create this lower impact sort of sub brand. And they got really weird because I think that they knew that it was going to be something that was a little bit experimental in nature. And a lot of the marketing for that particular brand was pretty out there. The type it shows, it's really bizarre. It doesn't really fit in any of the categories that I was listing before. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. We actually had a slide here. We're not going to play it. It's in the deck that I think that was circulated. There's a link to the Play New campaign, or the ad at least. That we're just going to skip it because we were having some issues with the video being a bit laggy. But that's something that you guys can look up. And honestly, everyone just, there's so many Nike campaigns out there, and there's so almost all of them I think are worthwhile to just see sort of the brilliance of the campaigns, even if it doesn't have to do with type. But again, something that you can sort of do on your own time. So color, that's the next thing that we're going to talk about. Color can say a lot about a brand. It can evoke plenty of emotion. Much like type, there's a whole psychology behind the palette that can influence how potential client or customer feels about you. I'm not going to delve too much into sort of the color psychology, but blue might evoke feelings of tech, while green feels organic and natural, just for example. But there are additional considerations. As we grow as a society and we learn more about accessibility, it's important to consider things like contrast, for example, in your palette. Various color vision deficiencies are more common than we think. And they can seriously affect how people interpret your brand, or even make things illegible altogether, which at the end of the day is obviously something that's very important. You want people to be able to read or see, or distinguish between various elements visually of your brand, or your brand collateral, your website, whatever the case may be. So an example might be, there's a bunch of images here. There's a couple different types of colorways, but at the bottom you see one that says monochromatic. And in this particular instance, this monochromatic palette uses various shades of red. So it's all shades and or tints of the same hue. That's basically the definition. But then you see on the right side of this slide, there are two mock-ups that sort of demonstrate as best as we can. It simulates two of the types of color vision deficiency or color blindness. So the top one is deuteranopia, the bottom one is protanopia. And you see in both of those instances that on the right, which is the sort of like untouched image, it's rich with a lot of warm red sort of hues in there, the red of the temple or the the structure in there is sort of a bright red color. And then on the left, the red is not present at all. So if you were to build your entire brand around, using a monochromatic palette that has a color that, various shades of a color that it's going to be more difficult for people to distinguish between, it could be problematic. This could impact your sort of the legibility or the perception of your content. So even if you have a specific target audience, you want to make an effort to make your brand as accessible as possible, sort of within that audience. And there is a lot of resources online for learning about things like web accessibility, of course, and just sort of, it's something to think about. It's definitely something to consider because you want it to be able to, you want people to participate. You want it to be as accessible and as broad as possible within your target. That being said, at the end of the day, color is, it's about emotional connection and impact. So if you reinforce your brand with strong strategic positioning, things Monica was talking about, and a great product or service, you may even end up owning palettes. We've got a couple examples on the next slide. I'll give you guys a minute to just look at these 5. And I bet you any money that you almost immediately know what brands these are without a logo or any sort of text. So in order from left to right, we've got Coca-Cola, FedEx, McDonald's, Google, and the last one is Instagram, which is kind of a flex because Instagram's, at least the most recent iteration of Instagram, their official color palette is a gradient swatch, which is like a pretty bold move. It has so much color in it. In any case, you can just see it's over time, the strength behind that brand, it carves out a niche with something even as simple and, something as simple and subtle as color. So the case study for this, again, it's a bit of a zag here, but I'll talk a little bit about Apple. They have a history of using color or the lack of color to great effect. And while typically they have had sort of a very clean, minimalist aesthetic since the Jobs era, they know when it makes sense to speak to a particular customer with sort of vibrant, saturated hues. So I'm sure some of you recall in some instances they've used this alongside various partners to sort of market color as a way to customize your experience or stand out. A lot of their tech, usually when it first comes out, it's available in just sort of like white or black or very limited range of colors. And then they typically roll out sort of like a variety of different pastel hues or super saturated colors to sort of, again, for people that want to like, express themselves, I suppose, a little bit more. But in this instance, I want to talk a bit about the sort of recently revived color ads that they used for originally for iPod, and now since iPod is basically not a thing, for Apple Music. And these ads are all about visualizing music. So, what does music look like? In this case, it looks like color. So whether they were using sort of warm, gorgeous, tropical hues and watercolor washes that were sort of reminiscent of an island sunset, the sort of like the song "The Swing is Tropical" is the name of the song by an artist named Nicodemus. That was an ad that they launched in 2007. Whether they're using that for Latin music lovers or vibrant neon with pop, or sort of dirty orange and sort of like earthier tones with splatters and graffiti with Eminem for hip hop heads, or shades of blue and geometry over a jazz track, or warm grays with Bob Dylan, playing his guitar in silhouette and singing. Each ad feels sort of tailor-made for a specific type of music fan. And it sort of spoke to this idea that there's something for everyone. They're using really bold color to speak to each niche. And I know it sounds weird, like there's almost a bit of a disconnect there maybe, but you know, we put in the deck that was circulated, there are some video links. Again, we're not going to show them now, but I also highly recommend looking up, there's like a 25-minute supercut that somebody assembled, like all of the ads that they have done for like iPod and music over the years. And you can kind of see what I mean, you know, like basically just like watch those videos and tell me that those colors don't capture the vibe of that particular sort of subgroup of music perfectly. So again, like really flexible, you know, like using color in different ways, and color in, at least in these cases, because there was not a lot of type, there was not, you know, if there was any figures, it was always silhouette. It was all, the focus was always on the color. And sort of its ability to make you feel different things, different ways. So yeah, really interesting example there. So we're having some technical difficulties here, but once we pop to the next slide. Okay, so finally, imagery and graphic devices. So, you know, when you're creating your visual identity, you want to pick a style that suits your brand. Probably want to build a photo collection. It could be custom photos, could be stock photography, but you want this to pull from when you're assembling things like social posts or laying out various collateral pieces. Pardon me. Graphic devices can be elements that you use regularly to sort of add visual interest. So it could be polka dots or horizontal slashes, for example. So you want to decide on a couple minimal treatments you can use consistently, and your final product will look polished, professional, and recognizable. And it's, you know, it's even sort of like a step on the path to creating a brand mark, often something that's going to resonate. People are going to identify with your brand. So where photos are concerned, you want to choose your imagery carefully. As the saying goes, a picture says 1,000 words. Abstract and textual imagery allows the focus to shift to things like logos or text and products. Photography with the figurative focus provides sort of an immediate connection. You know, humans, we identify very quickly with people and faces, so keep this in mind. An example might be if you're selling a face-to-face service, showing images of people interacting to paint a picture of what you offer. Conversely, if you're selling a delicious coffee product, perhaps leveraging abstract and textual images that exude warmth, maybe that's the move. You know, do you want a youthful, saturated, bright vibe, or do subdued, sophisticated, earthy tones suit your product better? Do you want your customers to see themselves in the imagery? Or, you know, do you want to spark a particular feeling or emotion? So you can see here in some of our examples, projects that we've worked on, there's a pretty wide variety here. So there's like, got vibrant, playful patterns, sort of soft, organic foliage, sort of like a gentler, knocked out logo on top of it. And there's even sort of minimal contemporary black and white logo cards that use sort of, you know, like dark marble or sort of like more sophisticated textures with very sharp logo imagery. So a graphic device could be anything, really. And as I said, it's a step on the way to developing a brand mark in most cases. You know, maybe it's a shape or style of imagery, as I've just outlined. It could even be an original illustration that speaks to your offering. Or if we're getting like really outside the box and the realm of graphics altogether, it could be like a piece of music or a sound. But all these components form the basis of your visual identity. So the advertising and marketing collateral you produce, the packaging of your product, your website, your social platforms, these all play a key role in providing a visual shorthand or touch point for what you have to offer. And as I said, sort of at the top of this section, you know, there are countless products and services out there that sort of claim to have made the creation of these elements very turnkey, which very well may be the case, but hopefully it should be clear that to make a real lasting impact, like even when using these platforms, significant thought and care should go into their development. You know, like there is a reason why there is behind all of this, and sort of behind the democratization of a lot of these design processes, why there is so much content there, you know, because a lot does go into it. So at the very least, it's something to think about when you get to this stage of, you know, launching your product or service. So that was a lot. There's a lot to consider, and this is, not even exhaustive really, but this is just one facet of the process. So I'm going to turn it over to Lucas. He's going to speak a little bit about developing and giving your brand a voice to tell people that everything that Monica and I have discussed, and also how to sort of pull it all together.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. That was really good. We're in the home stretch here. So we're moving on to tone and voice. So a brand isn't just about what you look like, it's what you sound like too. It's the language you use when you write copy and content, or even scripts for video or audio applications. You need to think about how your customer would like to be spoken to, and you should think about how they would speak to you. Is it conversational? Is it bubbly and exciting? Are you teaching them and want to express your authority? It's important to find your brand voice and then to use it consistently. An example I like to use a lot is the difference between Slack and Discord. You might be familiar with one or both of these. I'll explain them quickly just in case. So Slack is a communication platform that businesses use to help their teams communicate about projects or any other internal or external initiatives. And Discord is a communication and community platform that gamers and other web enthusiasts use to communicate about a variety of topics. One of the most significant differences between the two is their brand voice. So Slack caters to professionals in the business world, so they need to speak like professionals. And Discord is not a professional environment at all, so they can be more playful. If we take a quick look at the headers on their home pages here, you can see the difference immediately. You can see how professional Slack sounds. Their messaging is all about efficiency, flexibility, teamwork. They want to help businesses operate as smoothly as possible. Now look at Discord. It's all about imagination. They mention gaming and art. It's a place to hang out. It's a bit more casual. Well, it's a lot more casual. They also have these fun, colorful characters, which is an important branding choice that complements their brand voice. They're clearly more playful and easygoing. So while Discord and Slack are essentially the same communication platform, they speak to their target audience very differently, and that determines who the users end up being. And that's an example of how impactful your brand voice can be. Okay, before I go a bit further, I do want to loop back to the importance of having a detailed persona, because it is really helpful when it comes to determining your brand voice. As Monica mentioned, your persona has some demographic info and other more personal psychographic details like behaviors and attitudes, goals, frustrations, and other character traits. Your personas also benefit from having a bio or a quote. This helps your team empathize with your users even more, and understanding what your customers are saying about you and how they might talk directly to you can help you refine your own brand voice. And just on the topic of personas, another thing I want to point out, Monica did go over this, but it's important to highlight the difference between a proto persona and just a regular persona. So a proto persona, Monica also called it an avatar earlier. It's completely made up based on your assumptions from you or your stakeholders. And this is a good way to start brainstorming during the early phases of your business. It gives you a face and identity for your potential users, but you really shouldn't be making any design or business decisions based purely on a proto persona. As Monica mentioned again, what's right for you isn't always what's right for your customers. So to develop a true, reliable persona, you would have to conduct both qualitative and quantitative research. And Monica listed a bunch of methods. Some other qualitative methods would include things like semi-structured interviews, usability tests, contextual inquiries. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those right now for the sake of time, but there are many methods, and your objectives would determine which ones you would end up using. And okay, so I'll get back to messaging here. So you can pull out the important traits from your persona to establish some ground rules for your brand voice. For example, we worked on a brand identity for a home equity loan company, and the project involved defining their brand voice. The persona they provided was a customer age 65, and they were somewhat apprehensive about the product the company was offering. So our client wanted to come across as professional and authoritative, but not too intimidating. And in this case, there was also a secondary persona representing the children of their clients, who were often involved in the decision-making with their parents. So we had to come up with a brand voice that appealed to millennials and boomers. And I should point out that the personas provided to us were much more detailed than I just described. But again, for the purpose of time, I'll just give that quick overview. The way I like to start working on a brand voice is with some "we're this but not that" statements, like the examples you're seeing on the screen right now. So for example, we're casual but not playful, or we're professional but not stuffy. This helps set the tone. You don't need a lot of these, just a handful, like 6 or 7, like the amount that's on the screen there. And if you have a detailed persona, you should have a good idea of the balance that your brand identity needs. And this is an example of what your final deliverable would look like, and we call it a brand voice chart. So this chart would highlight 4 or 5 characteristics that best describe your business, plus a description of those characteristics, and then some do's and don'ts. For example, let's say you're starting a business where personal data is a sensitive subject for your customers. You'd want to ensure your tone and voice demonstrated that you are a secure and safe company. So for your messaging and communications with customers, you would have a rule about never asking too many personal questions or ignoring inquiries. And you may even want to avoid speaking in generalizations because some people find that uncomfortable, depending on the topic. And keep in mind, your brand voice isn't just about marketing and selling. It's also about how your employees communicate directly with your customers. This chart would be something that's included in your brand guidelines. So whenever you're writing copy or working on any type of messaging, it would be referenced. And while we do recommend developing your brand voice, it's not always something that gets done right away. It could be somewhat time consuming, and you often don't know how to communicate with your customers until you start doing it. So it's important to remember that you shouldn't let pieces like this hold you back from getting in front of potential customers. Just as an example, the last client we developed a brand voice for came back to us after a year, or came back to us a year after originally working with us, because they finally felt the need to have this part of their brand identity developed. So I know we've piled a lot on your plate so far, but don't worry. These different brand elements don't all need to happen at the same time. They're more like building blocks for your business. And then you have to put it all together. Once you've developed some or all of these brand elements that we just talked about, it's important to have them all together in a single, simple guideline document so you can refer to it easily, and so you can easily brief any future creatives with proper brand standards. The point is to ensure your brand's presence is consistent across the board, whether you're designing social media ads or launching a new product or even opening a storefront. If you were to work with us on a brand identity, your final package would include what we call a brand board, which has all your brand elements and usage rules on one easy to read PDF. There are more robust brand identities, which we also work on, and they can be anywhere from 20 to 100 pages. It all depends on the needs of that brand. When we used to do more design work for other companies and agencies, we had clients who would hand us a 100-page brand guideline, and we would have to follow it while designing the collateral or whatever they needed. And it sounds like it would be more time consuming for designers to have to follow these rules, but it actually saves a ton of time in the long run because we know exactly what we can and can't do from the beginning of a project. So your brand guidelines should be easily accessible by everyone on your team. They should be referring to it all the time. And it should be easily shareable with people outside your team so that everyone is always on the same page about your aesthetic, your style, and even your company values. You can see on this slide, there's just some examples of different rules that would be included in your brand guide, like your color palette, the safe space that would be around your logo, and other things like collateral examples. So yeah, there's no point in having a brand identity if you're not going to use it. You need to get it out there where people can see it and find you and recognize you. Using it and showing up is the act of marketing. It's where you put all your branding work to good use. And when you look at it this way, it's easier to understand how your brand identity is such a key part of the foundation of your business. And whether you're creating signage or business cards, packaging, anything else that's branded, you need to have that established identity in place to ensure it's all consistent. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it is all about consistency. I also want to bring up the persona one more time here, because it's an important tool that you have to use throughout the entire branding exercise. And then when you are happy with your brand, you need to make sure that your personas continue to be referenced while coming up with marketing strategies and tactics. I'm not going to pretend like I know a ton about marketing. That's more Monica's area of expertise. So all I'll say is that your brand guidelines and your personas are two super important pieces of your business that need to be treated with the proper time and care from the onset of your venture. And remember, as both Monica and Andrew mentioned, these are evolving pieces. You should continue your research with your customers. You should continue to revisit your brand identity. These things change, and none of it is set in stone. They'll grow and develop with you and your business. And finally, one additional thing that I want to mention that we offer with our brand package that you don't see too often is a basic brand strategy, which Monica puts together. And it provides some ideas and inspiration and general next steps that you can take now that you're ready to share your branding with the world. It is actually quite common for entrepreneurs to feel somewhat lost once their brand identity is complete. They just don't know what to do next, which is fine and normal. That's why we like to provide a little bit of guidance and, well, just a little shove in the right direction. And that brings us to the end of the crash course. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope it was insightful and that it helped you understand more about the importance of branding. And it looks like we do have some time left. So if any questions have popped up, we're good to open up for some discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Lucas, Andrew, and Monica. That was great. We do have Ali waiting very patiently with his hand raised. So Ali, please, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
So question that I have is that what is the best way to go about like researching customers? Should we go like a more academic route, like similar to what big corporations and basically the academia use, especially since this is white space, we're like small companies that are just starting out? Or should we just do small surveys like here and there from the customers, ask individual customers to get a better understanding of what we should be marketing towards?
That's a great question. So I definitely recommend both qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative example would be more like surveys, like market research, and qualitative would be more like interviews or field studies. Research does require larger budgets sometimes, and you'll see larger corporations spending a ton of money. But I recommend qualitative research for smaller companies because you don't need to talk to that many people for a qualitative study. I'm in the middle of reading this book right now about user research, and it says that if you interview 5 people, then you have an 85% chance of encountering 1/3 of the issues that affect all users. So it's not exactly the most time-consuming thing, which is good. And you can actually conduct it yourself by talking to people that fit within your target audience. And then it is, if you did decide to do quantitative research, there's plenty of survey platforms out there. Just keep in mind that if you were going to conduct that type of research, you need way more participation. Like you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of people in order to have valuable data.
Awesome, great.
Monica.
And another, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just want to see if Monica or Andrew had anything to add to that.
No, I think kind of looping back to what you said earlier about not letting anything hold you back. I think that's super important too. Like, don't get too fixated on what types of research you should be doing. If you notice you're having interactions even on social media, or people have bought from you in the beginning phases, like ask them questions. Just talk to people, talk to actual customers, talk to actual followers, leave questions on your socials. In any email communications, if you're doing email marketing, drop a, hey, let us know what you're thinking or feeling, or if you have any questions, and gather data from there as well. So it's not just about like the big surveys and running, surveys and like paying for somebody to do research for you. Like you can do a lot of stuff yourself at the beginning. So keep that in mind.
Great, thank you, Ali, for that question. There's a question in the chat as well. Chris is asking, how important is it to register trademark against logos and other elements of your brand? And is this part of your service?
Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I could take it. Oh, sorry, I just lost you guys. Yeah, that's a really good question. Typically, so my understanding of this is that because it's not something that we typically do, like we do not offer like a sort of a trademarking or service of that kind for packages that we do. But my understanding is that at this stage, trademarking offers you like an extra layer of protection. The act of actually like, at least in the US, I think like even if you were to do like a cursory sort of search on sort of copyright law, generally like a logo or brand that you put together is protected to the extent that like you've done it first. Like if you have the paper trail for it and you're actively using it, it is, yeah, exactly. It is more of a, that would be a question more, I think, for somebody whose expertise was illegal to make sure that you're protected there if there's any concerns. But just to simply answer your question, it's not something that we traditionally do. Like the act of creating a brand itself, it's definitely something worth protecting and something worth looking into, but not something that we typically do.
Hi, so just adding on to that, Chris, it is definitely more legal. Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. We did have a session, in fact, on legal basics for entrepreneurs. So a recording is available on our YouTube page. Chris, feel free to go review that session as well. In that session, Alex, who is a lawyer who gave that session, did share some resources for IP and trademarking and patents. So I think that will be very useful for you. Moving on, Ali, I see you've raised your hand again. Do you have another question?
Yes, another question I have, as I think Lucas mentioned, he was reading like a really interesting book. I was wondering if there are like any books or interesting resources you would recommend to founders who are starting out to get a like, I call this Jobs' level understanding of design, because he was such a visionary when he worked with Tony Fadell and all these people involved. Like, I mean, not, let's say, absolutely professional, but getting like a good and a high view understanding of design. Like, do you know resources or books that are like that, the Bible of like design or marketing, that reading that would basically give you 80% of the things you need in design, like not actually doing it, but understanding it?
Yeah, I could see Andrew reaching for some of his books right now.
Yeah, I actually was just checking to see, because I have, I think that actually some of the books that I would recommend, I do not have with me because they're probably, I'm actually using them in the course that I'm teaching. But I can definitely, if you like, there are some, from a design perspective anyway, there's some very good books that are about layout principles, which sounds very boring, But they effectively, I'm just going to see if I can just find them. And I can even just link them in the chat here, so I'm not wasting too much time. But they basically just give you like what I think is a very sort of accessible, even if you don't have a background in design, you're not taking, like a college level course or university level course in design. They give you a very sort of comprehensive overview of the sort of broader strokes of like design principles and visual communication. But honestly, there's so many books. It's off camera here. There's like a bunch of, there's just shelves full of like magazines and books that I've collected over the years. Going back to when I was in school or working at various agencies, or since we've started, just sort of collecting a library of that stuff. But I'll try to just think right now of a couple of sort of the best examples, and I'll see if I can just slide them into the chat for you to, bookmark or look up or order on Amazon or whatever.
Oh, and I also saw that you guys have like a small YouTube channel with just 3 videos. It would be great that if you guys like had a lot more, because I'm absolutely loving all the content and all the value you guys are giving to us. Especially like as just a recommendation, I would love to see like a video of like interesting resources on design, as the question I asked on your YouTube channel. And I would love to share it with my fellow entrepreneurs and for people who are basically trying to make the business work. So we can all help each other.
All right, thanks so much for checking that out.
Yeah,
that's great.
We just kind of started that.
Just starting that up, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Some positive feedback that's something that you're enjoying. But absolutely, I mean, we'll take those notes. Putting together an episode where we just talk about some of the resources we use would definitely be something that we could do.
Writing it down.
Yeah, that actually segues nicely into the next question. So it is about resources that we could recommend to help in creating logos, designs, or something like that. So that is actually what our YouTube channel kind of touches on. It is about those resources. A lot of people hear about Canva, Figma, all this stuff that's available to everybody online. So we've kind of started battling like designer against the machine. And seeing what a professional designer can do against some of these like free programs. So there is a lot of stuff out there, and there are pros and cons to everything. So as I mentioned, there's Canva, there's Figma, and they are available for anybody to go try their hand at potentially designing something. You might do your own logo initially for a pitch deck, just to lay something out. Yeah, Canva is a great resource for beginners. And then aside from actually designing stuff for where you would get inspiration or ideas, we like to use Behance and Pinterest. We make our own private Pinterest boards where we will start with mood boards just to get an idea of like the vibe, the aesthetic. We actually start with personalities. You can use it to kind of assemble what your persona is gonna look like and what they like the look of. So I would say those are the things that we use most internally. I don't know if Andrew has a few more things to add to that.
Sorry, in terms of tools, I was just compiling a little list here. Things in terms of resources that we use for which? What was it, Monica?
So I guess the question was, can we recommend resources to create logos and designs? So I mentioned both Canva and Figma. There's a question here, what is Canva? I guess I'll answer that. It's an online design tool. It's a tool that lets you design online. You could do anything like social post presentations. I think you can even design print pieces at this point. But there is a learning curve in using it. But you can do some pretty good stuff, and you can build the beginnings of a brand. It is obviously better to get professionals to build a brand for you. But once you have it in place, it is something that you can use once you know your colors and your fonts to develop as additional brand assets. Yep, somebody dropped the link in there to Canva. But we use our resource that we use internally are typically like Behance and Pinterest to just start generating ideas and get ideas down. And then we use Creative Cloud, like the full suite of Adobe products to design with.
Here's a couple. Sorry, here's a couple of books.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing
Awesome,
that.
thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions? Ali, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I don't know if you guys have enough time to answer all of it. But another thing I was wondering is that, as you know, I recently read a book on design. It was mostly UX UI because I'm mostly in that area because I do engineering, but it also touched on some interesting aspects I was interested in, which is like a minimalist design, designing something only if it serves a purpose to the customer. And despite the fact that one is usually mostly for like user interfaces and everything, I was wondering if there is something similar in designing marketing material too. Because like the purpose of a marketing material is to give them information about their businesses and services, right? Create an identity.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is who the target audience is and what your brand identity is. Like for a lot of brands, a minimalist approach may not be the best.
Yeah, it's tough
Monica,
to.
Andrew, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that one of the things that, I mean, yes, but what you just said, both of those things definitely apply. If in regards to specific materials, like specific marketing materials, I think a huge part, and Monica, I think, I don't know, you can back me up here, but it has to do with sort of hierarchy and sort of even design, like design principles. Like when you think about any sort of visual communication and you think about any sort of marketing materials, you want to like, to your point, there's going to be certain things, you want people to have a certain reaction. You want people to either like, you want to direct the person's eye, you want to direct them through these pieces to communicate the most important things, you know, first, make sure that they get all that information. And I think that at least that aspect of it, when you have your brand in place so that you have sort of the toolbox that you're going to use to create these elements, that kind of falls more into some of the books that I was referencing there about layout basics. Like, I guess from my perspective, something that I think, again, we generally sort of take for granted is that like everything around us is designed, like absolutely everything, right? Whether it's industrial design, graphic design, fashion design, landscape design, architectural design. There's like every object has been designed in some way, shape, or form. And there are rules that govern like every single one of those different fields has, typically like a very long history, it's evolved to the point it's at now for a specific reason. And so I think in a lot of ways, like really good design, you don't really necessarily, most people don't notice that it's good design. It's just something that just works or something that just speaks to them. It's kind of hidden in that way. And that's why I think it's kind of funny, like when it comes to marketing materials or some of the, in a broader sense, creating collateral and graphic design where branding is concerned, most people, I don't think, again, most consumers, they're not thinking about it in this sort of granular way, whether it's just something that appeals to them or it doesn't. And like what you're trying to do is make sure that you're appealing to the right people. And so all of these little things sort of like fit into that larger picture of like why things work, why things grab your attention, why things make you feel a certain way, why, some of those things I touched on, whether it's color or type or imagery, like all those things work together to, there's not really like an easy way to do it. I think like we are getting closer, as we touched on, there's all of these applications that are really trying to make it super, super turnkey and out of the box. But I think that while there are a lot of really great tools out there that are available for you guys to use, I think the part that's still kind of missing, or that you may have known if you've watched some of our YouTube videos, the things that we feel are missing is that those tools are not necessarily being approached with that in mind. Like from a design perspective, they're just being approached in a way where it's like, let's make this process simple, but like you need to at least enter into the process with an idea of who you want to reach and how before using any tool, you know, whether it's an agency, whether it's something that you're doing yourself, whether it's like an independent designer. Like, so sorry, that was kind of like a long-winded, like winding
No, not at
response
all.
to your
Not at all.
question, but I think it's just like, you know, that's something that basically on a daily basis we're dealing with. Like if we're creating collateral for our clients, like that's something that, you know, after a certain amount of time, I think as a designer, it just becomes a little bit second nature, which, you know, you kind of constantly have to be refreshing your understanding of the sort of field and seeing what's out there. But again, I think that at least some of those books will explain some of those in a more general sense, some of those, I don't know the word that I would use for it, but basically just their principles of design, like why we respond the way that we do to certain things and how our eye moves through a page or digital, you know, through a screen or a website. You know, there's definitely a best practice for each thing that you want to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you
No
for that
problem.
answer, Andrew. Emily is asking, how many brand avatars would be appropriate to create? Are they usually similar? And how specific detail should we aim for?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So initially when you're starting, it is good to start with one unless you absolutely need to do both. And a good way to gauge this is kind of what they call the doorway method. If somebody came to your website, for instance, would you have to ask them right off the bat, are they there for women's products or men's products? Or in a skincare line, for example, maybe you would say, is this for oily skin or super dry skin? If you don't need to ask that question, then I would say stick with one and then look at your demographics. Do you find that it's skewing heavily towards women? If that's the case, then your avatar is going to be a woman and you're going to build it around there. Around that. But if you do need to split them up, and this will happen down the road, especially if you add more products, services, you might find that you are segmenting your avatars based on, like, if you had like a sports brand, maybe you have runners and some of them are trail runners and some of them are road runners. So there are instances where you will split them up, but try to start with one unless it is absolutely necessary to divvy them up. And as for details, get as specific as possible. Like think of this person when you're not even, you know, at your system or working on it. Think of them as, you know, a potential friend or somebody that's sitting across from you at the table. Pretend you went for dinner with them. Like, what did they order? Think about the art that they would hang on their wall and just get to know them as intimately as possible. Something I'd recommend.
In the deck, there's a couple of slides with a bunch of different things that you can think about when developing your personas too.
Yep. There's a whole list. Just sit down and answer all those questions and just continue to flesh it out. Even find pictures of them online. What do you think they look like? What kind of clothes are they going to wear? Where are they going to live? Yeah, just pretend they're your BFF and fill it out.
I'll also add that, like, it is super common to have a primary and secondary persona. Even if the secondary persona is just like slightly different than the primary. For example, like Monica mentioned, like a makeup line or something, your primary persona would be the like general audience that you're selling to. They could be like casual users, they use it day to day, but you might have a secondary persona who use it professionally, and you would be selling to them and talking to them slightly differently than your primary persona.
Great, thank you. There's another question in the chat. How do brand avatars differ from B2B, or are they simply the same as B2C?
There are considerations for B2B. It's not as like emotional of a purchase, I would say. You got to go through and there's a lot of red tape, you got to go through hoops. Like, it depends on who's doing the purchasing. So you're thinking about that, not necessarily the end user. So there was something there specifically for B2B. Yeah, you're thinking of yeah, who's making the decision, who makes the buying decision? Is it the CEO? Is it somebody from the procurement team? You may want to segment those, whoever's doing the research for it. And it also depends on the kind of business. Or is this just a startup? Is it a small business, or is it enterprise level? Is it an international brand? All of that will make a difference. So it's not necessarily who the end user is, but who is buying it, I would say. You focus on.
Great, thank you. Eileen, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, question I had is that I'm sure you guys have noticed that some of the like the advertisement you guys see in general from different companies, they don't appear like as authentic and as basically real as other companies. For instance, like there's kind of, I don't know how to put it into words, but they sort of lack substance. Like some advertisements are really inspiring and are really memorable, like especially the ones, for instance, Steve Jobs era, the advertisements early days for Nike, those kind of stuff. When you look at them, you're actually inspired. But there's some basic form of marketing material that look uninspired and look fake. So how do we avoid this fakeness in our advertisement and speak, let's say, in a way that it doesn't appear that we are basically trying to force our product onto them? We just want basically we want to basically speak to a customer in a way that it naturally appeals to them, rather than appearing that we are trying to sell them something, or appearing we're trying to basically, I forgot the word, we're trying to appeal to what they want just to get a sale, or just to promote our product, or just to get our company, more eyeballs. How do we do that?
The $1 million question. Yeah, I don't know if I mean, I have my thoughts, but I don't know if I'm the one to take this one. I think I would just say that my feeling is that, a lot of those campaigns that you see, or certainly some of the ones you described, like for Apple or for Nike, not that it's certainly something that can be done at a sort of entrepreneurial level, but I think that the resources that those companies have and the agencies that they work with to produce those campaigns are, they're typically some of the best in the business, like because they can afford it. And I think what makes those agencies that are producing that content so good, aside from just, probably decades and decades of experience in really, really understanding that, it goes back to a lot of the stuff that Monica was talking about, which is all of the sort of groundwork, like all of the foundational stuff for anybody to sort of understand to deep, like when I was talking about Supreme, for example, I know that that's sort of like, that's a more organic example because but it kind of speaks to what I'm saying. If you're at like the grassroots level, you're just starting out, like their understanding of their community and like what those people would be into, like defined something that they didn't even, like they had no idea it was going to turn into what it turned into. They were just like, we got to create some sort of logo for our brand, something for sort of our shop, something to put on the merchandise that we want to sell. And they just like had this deep understanding of their target demographic, sort of the community they belong to. And that resulted in a product that I think, to this day, like people, whether they're celebrities or people lining up for like the latest drop, like Supreme still, it maintains that level of authenticity. There's actually some really interesting, if you do a deep dive, the artist that Barbara Kruger, that activist that the logo is based off of, she had something to say about, like people were asking her, like, do you feel like this was like stolen, blah blah blah, and initially she was just like, no, this is great, because like that's what she was all about. She was about people just like, nothing is owned basically. But then since the company was purchased for like $2.1 billion. And now it's this like, you know, they've gone after people like that, like Supreme has gone after people at the scale they're at now. Sort of getting off topic, but the point is like, it's just really interesting seeing like how businesses grow with their audience and grow with their community. And I think a lot of it comes from just a really, really deep understanding of who they're talking to, you know, like that's what it is. The last thing that I'll say about it is Monica and Lucas are probably just sick to death of me talking about this because I talk about it so frequently. So there was a period there with Adidas where like Adidas had done sort of not so much a rebrand, but they had sort of done this new campaign years ago called Adidas is All In. And it worked so well on me. Like I was just like, I was all into that campaign. Like I was just like, I will just like, just whatever it is that's Adidas, just put it in front of me, like I will buy it. And I think just because of my background in the business I was in, I was like, why is this working so well on me? And I sort of tried to reverse engineer sort of the elements of it, you know, like whether it was the music they were using in their advertisements or the people they were sponsoring, like the type, you know, they were sponsoring at that time a lot of artists, like visual artists and musicians and like dance choreographers and like people that were kind of like, you know, Nike's going after like LeBron James, you know, or like the top of the pyramid athletes, and Adidas was like, we can't compete with that, so let's just like go after all of these sort of niche. And again, it was just like, it was very successful. And I think that it comes from taking the time to really do the work up front to figure out who it is that your product is for, or your service, and just like, you know, you just got to know that inside out, and that will hopefully lead through this process. It's again, some of the stuff that Monica was talking about, the design process, some of the stuff Lucas was talking about voice, to something that feels authentic to the people that matter.
And it's also why you're there. Like, why are you starting the business? Why is this the product or service you're offering? Like you've all obviously like put thought into it because it matters to you. You care about it. You know a lot about it. And there's an authenticity there. Like you care about the customer's problem. You care about the customer in general. Like Nike is a great example. Apple, like Steve Jobs, he was fanatic about what that looked like, what that felt like, what the consumer would get from using his product, how they would interact with it. He was obsessed with it. Nike cares a ton about athleticism and sport, and they want everybody to like jump in the ring or get on the track and like do the stuff. Like there's no doubt that they truly, genuinely, deeply care about what it is they're doing and offering. And then you can get some Joe Schmo drop shipper that found an item that was trending on TikTok, tries to build a shop and sell it, and it's just not there. Like he can't make it connect for, you know, there's that lack of like why, and, you know, maybe passion, and also understanding of the customer and why they would want it. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, you got to give people credit for sure. Like I think a lot of this stuff sort of conceptually, it seems like very complex, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is like, it's very subconscious, like how people react to things, and also just like, you know, give credit to people for being smart, like being smart and know it, you know, like everybody that's participating in the system that we live in knows, you know, they know the deal. So it's just kind of like, if you come across as authentic and you've done your research, then it's gonna resonate.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we have I saw in the chat, I think there's a couple more questions that popped up.
Yeah, so Mary has a question. For bootstrapping startups, would you find it practical to set the palette tone at the beginning and change or experiment with these elements down the lane? And if that's okay, and is it something that typically happens?
Oh yeah, that's how it works. Like you can Google the evolution of the McDonald's logo, the Pepsi logo, the Google
For
logo.
example,
like, yeah.
I don't know if you could see my screen. This is one of the books that I put, one of the Taschen books I was talking about.
Here, I'll stop sharing.
Oh yeah, I guess I could share it. People would be able to see it a bit better. But
there you
go. Yeah. So it's basically just like this spread is there's a number of spreads throughout the book. It's like a history and the evolution of this logo going back to 1907. So obviously that's like a very long timeline. But I think like, you know, this is from a book called Logo Beginnings. It's like a beautiful, huge coffee table book by Taschen. It's definitely worth checking out. There's another one that's back there on my shelf called Logo Modernism, which is about sort of current trends, especially, I mean, a lot, you see this with a lot of tech companies and just sort of how logos have been pared down over the years to be to have a very minimal aesthetic. But certainly from a design perspective, that stuff is changing all the time. You know, you'll see businesses do like, I think where palette is concerned, generally with bigger companies, the refinements are more subtle over time, but certainly with everything else from type to logos, those things are changing quite a bit. There's some very good examples of it, like Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. Like Pepsi is a great one because it's changed so much and so dramatically. Like when Pepsi first started as a company, it was this intricate sort of, it was red and white like Coca-Cola, and it was this intricate sort of like script like font, much like Coca-Cola. And then whether it was to differentiate themselves over the years, or, you know, just reacting to just sort of like changing demographics and changing times, you know, it got a little bit tighter, then a little bit tighter, then the script was a little bit tighter, then the cap was behind the script, then they replaced the script with sort of like a bold sans serif font, like in the 80s or the 90s, I think, where it just said Pepsi in black letters over top the cap. And then the cap got minimal, and then it was just the cap, and then the cap turned into what it is today, which is that like red, white, and blue abstract mark. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like the practicality, like I think, you know, it would be good, I think, to have some like consistency is important so that you can start building like recognition. But you really just kind of have to stay plugged in to like how people are responding to it, you know, because like if people are telling you, I mean, that would be an extreme case that somebody would actually be communicating to you like, hey, I don't like this color that you have. But you know, there will be little things, you know, it's fine to like experiment as you're going along and seeing sort of what works. You know, I think this actually speaks a little bit to the following question as well, which we can come back to, which is it better to use logo designing? Is it better to use logo designing services, or would drawing it ourselves work to the same effect in terms of getting traction? You know, I think when you're starting out, depending on what stage that you're at, you know, like if you want to have like the services Monica was talking about, there's a lot of services that you can sort of leverage, sort of do it yourself, or from an existing library of icons, or, you know, again, like if you have some sort of skill when it comes to draftsmanship, you could certainly do something yourself, especially again, if drawing something yourself speaks to all of the work that you've done up to that point, and determining that's something that maybe like would be appealing or feel authentic to your specific consumer, then by all means, like you can start there, because it is something you can revisit. Like it's not that we don't exclusively do brands like straight out of the gates. You know, we'll have clients come to us that already have something in place. Like maybe they've been in business for a year or 2 years or even longer, and they've been using something that one of them just mocked up, you know, in like Microsoft Paint or something like that. And up until this point, it has done the trick. But now they have a better understanding of their audience. You know, they kind of know where they're at, where they want to go. Maybe they have a little bit more in the way of resources that they can invest in this. And at that point, they may come to somebody like us to like sit down with them and really figure out all the data that they have now. You know, what do they want their visual identity to look like? So yeah, it kind of depends on what point of the process you're in and the resources available to you.
I want to add to that we've had people come to us who were too early for the branding phase. Like they couldn't answer the questions that we were asking that we needed to actually design a meaningful brand for them. And there's another question here that just popped up that's kind of related, that says, how do you know when what you believe is a good brand isn't what your demographic is looking for? What I like versus what they like.
Can we just come back to that real quick? I just have one more thing to add I think Marie's question, just about does this typically happen? The end of that question about logo evolution or brand evolution was how are such changes or evolution perceived, which I think is important. Just really quickly to talk about, because there are examples of this going sideways. I think that the most obvious examples of this that I can think of generally have to do with municipal projects or projects that have to do with like they're maybe not private, maybe they involve taxpayer dollars, even though it might only be like a fraction of a cent that's actually coming out of the taxpayer's pocket. But you'll occasionally see these stories where like a public institution rebrands and they, you know, they make public the amount of money spent on this project to rebrand, because you know, maybe it was using taxpayer money, and like sometimes people will just lose it. Like they'll just be like, the logo was fine, like it was why did we even change this, like, or you know, again, I think one thing that we see a lot is like if changes are really subtle, you know, to the average person's eye, they're just like, you know, the value is not like, they don't understand like probably the immense amount of strategy and thinking and the months of work that went into developing you know, a new logo, or even arriving at the conclusion that they needed to change their branding a little bit. But you know, I think just as often it works really well, and I think in the cases where those evolutions or changes work really well, people don't perceive them really at all. Like you don't, it's kind of what I was saying. It's like, you know, a lot of these logos, like Google is sort of an example where Google is sort of like their logo has been, and their brand is very iterative and has changed a lot. But because Google is so sort of, you know, omnipresent, like they're everywhere, and you're seeing it like basically on a daily basis, most people don't even like notice when they make tweaks to their logo or like their logo mark, or like maybe they slightly change the palette of colors that they're using, you know, like, so yeah, I mean, it really depends. I don't know that it's something that you need to work at, or excuse me, worry about at really early stages. You know, like I think that with startups, you know, right out of the gates, it's still very much it's a learning process, and you're trying to collect as much information as you can while simultaneously sort of implementing and sort of evolving as you go along. So I don't think that it's something that should hold you back. But the flip of that is that I think that you know, as Lucas touched on a lot in our presentation, that consistency is such an important thing. Like it's like, you know, if you're changing your colors or your logo or your type like every other month, like you're going to be losing, or probably like as many people as you're gaining. Like there's not going to be, you're not building towards anything. So you need to really like think about what changes you want to make, and if they're, you know, absolutely essential, basically would be what I would say to that. Yeah, brand is never done. That's right. So sorry, so I didn't mean to interrupt, Lucas. Yeah, that next question.
There was just another question about knowing whether the brand is actually good, whether it's something that the consumers are like, or whether it's just something that you like. I think that comes back to the personas a bit more too.
Yeah, and talking to them and listening to your customers. Yeah, I don't know, there's a bit of intuition that comes with that too.
It's like if you've done the research and you put together a persona and you're basing your branding off who you believe your target audience to be, then that's kind of the only course of action that you can take. And then the brand evolves with your business as you grow.
Great, thank you so much. If there are any more questions, please ask away. In the meantime, I'm just dropping in a link to a survey. Please take the time to fill this up. It'll help us develop such sessions for you and improve further. Yes, Ali?
Yeah, I was wondering for the certification. So it was mentioned in the email, we need to attend 9 sessions here. So if I attend like sessions in the fall semester, can I like count the sessions I attend right now? Like Okay, let me start again. So I'm gonna attend some sessions during the fall semester, some sessions during the winter. Do the sessions that I take during the fall transfer into the winter for my certification?
I will have to check on that,
Mm.
and I'll get back to you tomorrow if that's all right.
Oh, sure.
I don't want to give you
got
any
my email.
information and not be able to live up to it. So I'm just going to
Mm.
check at my end, and I'll send out an email to you tomorrow.
Well, just in case this is my email, just send me in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any more questions? All right. Okay. In case there are any more questions, Lucas did share the deck. Lucas shared the deck with me, and I sent it over to all the attendees. The information, contact information for VESP is there, so feel free to contact them directly as well.
Yeah,
Lucas, Monica, and Andrew, on behalf of Markham Small Business Center and Y-Space, thank you so much for sharing all your insights, your resources, your expertise today. It was such a great session. So I really, really appreciate your time and effort. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for all the great questions too.
Of course. Thank you so much for everyone to attend the session, for the engagement, for your enlightening questions and conversations. Thank you so much. And I hope to see everyone in our next session, which is going to be next Tuesday. And we'll be covering grants and government incentives, another great topic. Thank you, Fatima, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for attending. Take care. And I hope to see you next week. Bye.